the Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
What's going on, guys? We are back for episode 5 of the Everything Ravens podcast. My name is Logan. I'm the host of this podcast. I run the Instagram account at everything_Ravens, which is currently the biggest Ravens fan page community on Instagram. Make sure you follow me on that account, as well as follow at Everything Ravens podcast on Instagram to get all the latest updates involving this podcast. We have some news today. Kyrie could not make it in today, but Brooks, who missed last week, is back. So it'll be me and Brooks running the show this week.
What's up, guys? Happy to be back. Big shout out to Spencer for filling in for me on last week's episode. Kyrie, we miss you, but hopefully next week we're all back and have Spencer behind the scenes doing what he does best and all three of us recording.
Alrighty, so the topic for this week's episode, we are going to be ranking our draft classes, the Ravens draft classes from 2008 to 2018. We are not going to put 2019 or 2020 because if we did that, they would automatically be last just because we simply don't know what those classes yet. 2020, I think they'll be a great class, but they simply have not played a snap in the NFL yet, so we can't put them on this list. And in 2019, we've only really got to see 1 year from them, so it's unfair to rank either of them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited to see what the 2020 class does next year. I have high hopes and high expectations, and obviously the 2019 class, in my opinion, delivered their rookie season, and I think they will continue to build on that. I think Hollywood's poised for a big year, but it's just a little too early to tell. But it gives us an option to actually look at, we're cutting it off right where Eric DeCosta took over, so we're going to look at the last decade of Ozzie Newsome's drafts and take a trip back to see what he gave us as his parting gift.
Yeah, well, this will give us an idea of how much of a genius Ozzie truly was.
And we're going from 2008 to 2018, so we're looking at Joe Flacco's first draft class year all the way to Lamar Jackson and that whole era of Ravens football.
Yeah, two nice bookends to have it start with our franchise quarterback and end with the franchise quarterback. All right, so without further ado, let's get into this. At the bottom of the list, this is the list that me and Brooks compiled together, by the way, guys. So this ain't our individual list. We both made individual lists, but we put them together to make this complete list. So at the bottom of our list, at the number 11 spot, we ended up having the 2012 draft, which in my opinion was not really a standout draft. We had Courtney Upshaw, Kelechi Osemele, Bernard Pierce. Bernard Pierce had his moments. Courtney Upshaw had his moments. But again, neither of them really amounted to much. And Kelechi Osemele was our best player from that class, but he only was 4 years here. So that's why I think it should be last.
Yeah, I was tempted to put one of the years with our first round bust in here. We didn't have a first round pick in this year's draft. Upshaw never really lived up to his potential. Work ethic quite wasn't there. He never really played like a Raven, in my opinion. You go down this draft board, no one really strikes you. No one really stands out. Osemele, he was good. He wanted too much money. He didn't extend past his rookie contract, But if you look down the list, as the worst draft we're going over, there's still some quality NFL players on here. Osemele obviously lasted. Pierce, as you said, was a great complimentary back. But there's just no impactful players, and that's what Ozzie was known for drafting, so that's why it ranks last in our list.
Yeah, I mean, you go down the list. You have Asa Jackson, who started a few games. Tommy Streeter never really did much. Gino Gradkowski, who started a few games. You had a bunch of players that just made little to no impact, besides literally Osemele. So I think this was the easy last choice. Yeah, enough talking about this. This draft sucked. But let's get on to our next our next draft, which is number 10. We have the 2015 draft, which is notorious to be known as the Brashad Perriman draft, which is one of the most notorious busts in the history of this team. But there was some good in this draft in the middle, but again, pretty lackluster draft in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you go down this board, I thought this was going to rank last, but if you look at it, there were some quality picks that just really didn't pan out that much. Zadarius Smith, 4th round pick here. He played well as a Raven. Obviously, he's hit his stride in Green Bay. We had to choose between him and Judon. Hopefully, Judon stays next offseason and we're able to reach a contract extension, and it proves that we made the right choice there. But that was a 4th rounder. Darren Waller in the 6th rounder never could put it together as a Raven, but balling out in Oakland right now. The only player on this list that you look down that's remained a Raven, that stayed true to us and been the impact player is Nick Boyle in the 5th round. Trey Walker rest in peace, the 4th-round pick out of Temple we had. He showed flashes. The sudden and unexpected death, obviously, so sad. But he never really got a chance to prove himself on the field. Buck Allen, he did a little bit, but those are all later round picks we're looking at. When you grade these drafts, you have to look at the early rounds. Brashad Perriman, 1st-rounder, never amounted to anything as a Raven. Max Williams, 2nd-rounder. Carl Davis, 3rd-rounder on the defensive side. None of these players were impact players to us. None of them were starters. This is why this is towards the bottom of our list.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Brashad Perriman, you can't really say never did anything. He did something, but it wasn't what we wanted him to do.
Yeah, he dropped catches. That's what he did for us on the field.
Yeah, not quite what fans wanted to see.
But you have to notice when he went into a different system in Tampa Bay, he's able to produce a little bit more in that go get it 50-50 ball type offense. So he really just wasn't a fit for us. He has talent, and Ozzie was able to identify that from the draft, but he wasn't a match for our offense and what it was at this point in Joe Flacco's career.
Yeah, and now he's a member of the Jets, which doesn't really say much because they sign literally every Raven to ever exist. So,
all right, and then we have in our number 9 slot the 2010 draft. This draft, another notorious big bust, Sergio Kindle, the 2nd-rounder. We didn't have a 1st-rounder in this draft. 2 2nd-rounders, Sergio Kindle and Mount Cody. Neither of these picks really panned out. Kindle never really seeing the field very much, had the injury his rookie season, the off-the-field incident where he said he fell down a flight of stairs. The reason we bumped this draft up above the other two just a notch is we did get that tight end duo of Ed Dickson and Dennis Pitta in the middle rounds. Dickson actually being the first pick there. Dennis Pitta, he battled injuries his whole career, never really could stay healthy, but when that duo was together on the field, Pitta was Flacco's favorite target, and Dickson was a great complementary tight end, and we ran that 2 tight end set perfectly. Arthur Jones, late round pick. All 3 of those guys were role players and impact players in our Super Bowl team, so they get a bump up even with those 2 1st-round busts or 2nd-round busts.
Yeah, I don't really think Ed Dickson was that impactful in Baltimore, but the reason I agree with 2010 being bumped up a bit is because of Arthur Jones and Dennis Pitta. Dennis Pitta was Joe Flacco's security blanket for many years. He did have the injury concerns, but Dennis Pitta's most likely a top 3 tight end in Ravens history. Todd Heap's far and away the best tight end ever for this team, but you have Shannon Sharp only spent 2 years for us. Yeah, you could even argue Mark Andrews is a top 3 Ravens tight end ever, but I think Dennis Pitta definitely makes that list. And then Arthur Jones was a very impactful, very solid defensive lineman for us. I think he was a key part of the defensive line for that Super Bowl run, and then he ended up getting the big contract from Indianapolis. So in my opinion, this draft class, while you did have Sergio Kindle, you did have Terrence Cody, which Sergio Kindle did absolutely nothing. One of the biggest busts ever. Terrence Cody, I always thought he had a little potential, but then he really did nothing. Then he got in trouble, obviously. So, but you do have Pitta, you do have Arthur Jones. So in my opinion, that bumps it up a bit. And that's kind of been the theme for these first few drafts is they were really lackluster, but you had like that one player middle of the draft that kind of made an impact.
Yeah, what's nice is when we look back on these drafts, you realize over the course of 7 rounds, we didn't have a draft where we totally missed completely. We were able to find players that played for us and played like Ravens. It's just you have to grade harder when we missed on these early round picks, like in our next selection, the 2013 draft, which we ranked 8th. That was the Matt Elam year coming off the Super Bowl. Matt Elam was a 1st-round pick. Arthur Brown, a 2nd-round pick. Neither of those guys panned out remotely, never amounted to anything. But you look down the line some more. Brandon Williams, Kyle Juszczyk, Rick Wagner, all those guys have proven that they can play at the NFL level, have some longevity. John Simon was a 4th-round pick that year. He never amounted to much as a Raven, but he's gone elsewhere and produced some nice numbers. The problem I have with this draft is I mentioned those 3 guys, Williams, Juszczyk, and Wagner. Juszczyk and Wagner did not last that long as Ravens. We were unable to retain them. So Williams is the only player on this list that really had longevity here in Baltimore and was able to make an impact.
Yeah, a common theme for these past 3 drafts at the bottom tier is these 3 drafts are basically known to be notorious bust drafts, whether it's 2015 with Perriman, 2010 with Sergio Kindle, or now 2013 with Matt Elam and Arthur Brown. All of them are known to have busts, but again, this is much like the 2015 draft where we found talent in the middle rounds, but the talent has produced a bit more and we've got a bit more talent out of it. With Brandon Williams, who's developed into one of the best nose tackles in the league, ended up getting paid highly when he hit free agency, becoming the highest paid nose tackle in the league. Also got Kyle Juszczyk, ended up becoming the best fullback in the league, got paid like it, now doing really well in San Francisco. Ricky Wagner was a good tackle at the time. He's not very good now, but he got paid like a top tackle when he hit free agency. And then Ryan Jensen only had one good year here, but that 1 year he really made an impact and really made his name as arguably one of the best centers in the league. So what we got out of this draft was players who were arguably some of the best at their positions at one time, or even still are. So I think we got a lot of value out of this draft. We just didn't get a lot of longevity value.
I think this is also a test to how well the Ravens develop talent. You look at these late round picks that the Ravens are able to get the most out of them, get them to produce at a high caliber level in the NFL is incredible. I know when we were reviewing the drafts, you were very high on Jensen. Great quality as a 6th round pick here in this draft. I was always a little hard on him. This is the 2013 draft. Matt Burke was a phenomenal center. He retired after 2012. I never felt like Jensen filled his shoes, but then again, that's a pretty tough hill to climb. But if you look at this draft through and through, even Jensen, he only had one great year and then he left. Wagner, Juszczyk, they all got big contracts elsewhere. So Williams was the only one staying around. That's why it's still towards that bottom half of our list.
Yeah, I kind of see your point there. But now let's move on to the year after, which is the 2014 draft, which is the number 7 spot on our list. And this draft is unlike the last 3 drafts we've had on this list. This is a draft where we actually hit on our first pick, and it wasn't just a hit, it was a home run. I'm talking about a guy who we were hoping to be the successor of the greatest player to ever play here. Did not end up to be the case, but while he was here, he did make a really meaningful impact, making 4 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pros in 5 seasons. That's ultra impressive for a player in their first 5 years, and that is CJ Mosley, obviously. I think CJ Mosley alone, you could have bad players down the rest of this list, and this draft would still be right around the spot because of the impact CJ Mosley made in Baltimore. We also did get some other players who did make an impact. Timmy Jernigan made an impact for the few years he was here before he traded him. Brent Urban, he never really made a super big impact, but he started quite a bit games for the Ravens, and he was a solid defensive lineman. And you go down the list, Sean Urschel, we were hoping would be our starting center, but he ended up retiring. Extremely smart guy, though. Michael Campanaro was always injured, but he made some impact as a kick return. And Crockett Gilmore, we thought would maybe be the next great tight end in Baltimore, but injuries caught up to him.
Yeah, if you look at this draft class, obviously you hit it. CJ Mosley, the headline pick, the first rounder, that was a great pick. He was phenomenal for us while he was here. I would argue it's Eric DeCosta's only mistake as general manager of the Ravens is not franchise tagging CJ Mosley. I know he was hurt last year, but I still think he's one of the best linebackers in the league. I'm excited to see what Patrick Queen does. It didn't seem to cost us that much, but I would have loved to retain him. You go down this list, though. After that, there's no one who really lived up that much. Terrence Brooks, Crockett Gilmore, I was disappointed in both of them. I know they both battled some injuries and never really hit the field. John Urschel with early retirement. Michael Campanaro, as you said, he proved to be a little shifty in the slot and have some talent in the return game, but he never saw the field that much, battled some injuries. This is an unfortunate class that really never, I thought, reached their potential, but Mosley definitely hit, and I think Jernigan was a solid, non-3-down defensive lineman, but definitely a role player, situational guy to play up front. A good guy, got big money in Philly, but he was solid while he was here.
Yeah, I was definitely a fan of this draft in a way. I think it's a lot better than the other drafts, and we did get some impact out of those defensive linemen. So, in my opinion, this was a good draft for us, especially considering the CJ Mosley pick.
And from one first-round Alabama pick to another, we're going to 2017 in the 6th slot. Marlon Humphrey, we're talking about another absolute home run of a first-rounder. This was an interesting draft. Down the line, you go Tyus Bowser in the 2nd. He's steadily improving. I think this is one of those drafts that we looked at that, it's hard to rank because Bowser, I think, has potential to really break out next year. And if he does, this could move up the list. And if he doesn't and he busts and he goes back and reverts a little bit, this could move down a little bit. But you go down the line, there's no one who really reached their impact until you get that 6th round with Chuck Clark, which bookends the draft with Marlon Humphrey and Chuck Clark, which really rebuilt our secondary, which struggled for a while in between those years of the Super Bowl run to 2017.
Yeah, you look at this draft, and the 2017 draft was one of the most talented in recent memory. And it really sucks that we only came out of this draft with Humphrey and Clark when we could have had a lot more talent looking back at it. But during the time, you can't really blame Ozzie. You know, I wanted a wide receiver in this draft, but Marlon Humphrey ended up becoming an amazing pick. Tyus Bowser, like you said, is the wild card of this class. Who knows? He has one more year in. If you're speaking historically, pass rushers in Baltimore are known to break out in their contract years, so that could be the case with Tyus, especially with our stacked defensive line with Williams, Campbell, and Wolf now. And like I said, my hot take was Tyus Bowser gets 9 sacks this upcoming season. I think he breaks out in his bag year and benefits from the big defensive line. I also have Chris Wormley, who he started games, but he was kind of like Brent Urban. He wasn't ever really that good. Tim Williams, I actually had high hopes for him. I thought we got a steal with him in the 3rd round. He didn't amount to much, but I personally met Tim Williams before. I have his autograph. I've gotten a picture with him. Extremely nice guy. It just kind of sucks he didn't work out in Baltimore. And then you scroll down the list. You have Nico Siragusa, Jermaine Illuminor, both suck. But shout out to Eric DeCosta for somehow getting a 4th round pick for Jermaine Illuminor. I don't know how he does it. He's a wizard. And then Chuck Clark, I think getting a player like Chuck Clark who wears the green dot for our defense, already got the huge contract extension. That's a home run in the 6th round. Not just a home run, that's a grand slam considering he was a 6th round pick.
Yeah, and it's hard to ridicule a draft where you got Marlon Humphrey and Chuck Clark, 2 stars in the back end. Chuck Clark, I think, is going to really improve, take over a bigger role next year, his full-time role without Tony Jefferson. And I think Bowser, definitely, as you said, contract here in Baltimore, he has a lot to prove. But I think with only 7 picks here, we drafted a little bit too much for need. We had 2 outside linebackers, 2 guards in this draft, and really only one of them hit. Both guards missed. Tim Williams, obviously a miss in the 3rd round. So that's the only reason it's not higher on our list.
Yeah, good draft with the bookends, lackluster in between. Alrighty, let's get into 2009, which is our next pick, the number 5 spot on this list. And the thing about the 2009 draft, this was really interesting. In my opinion, we had 3 hits with our first 3 picks, 3 misses with our last 3 picks, but this was the least amount of picks on our list for a draft class, only 6 picks. But using baseball terminology here, once again, we had a .500 batting average, which I think is really good to come out of the draft with 3 players, or not just 3, but half the class making an impact for you.
Yeah, not just impact players. In my opinion, I think some of these players had superstar potential. Ladarius Webb in the 3rd round, one of my favorite Ravens. When he was in his prime, he was electrifying. He had quick feet. He was a playmaker in the secondary. I know injuries, it's a common theme we've talked about in this pod, derailed his career, and it was poor timing. It was right after we had that big contract. We were sort of handicapped him after that, and it sort of put a burden on what was a great career. But if you look in front of that, Paul Kruger, 2nd round, the conductor, he was a great situational guy, great scheme fit for us, great pass rusher. He had quick hands off the line. He got that big contract in Cleveland that only you get if you're a star pass rusher. He never really lived up to it, as those Cleveland contracts often do. I'll give him some slack there. Blame that more on the Browns. And then the feel-good story of Michael Orr in the 1st round. I think Orr, for what he did as a Raven, he never really maxed out his potential, but he was good enough to get the job done. He was a solid 1st rounder. He held down that left side. He had some problems with penalties, but if you look down the line, Michael Orr, Paul Kruger, Ladarius Webb, those are 1, 2, 3 hits. You can't complain that much.
Yeah, Ladarius Webb was a top 10 cornerback in the league before he tore his ACL, and then after that, he kind of went downhill. He was still a solid player, just extremely inconsistent. And he was frustratingly inconsistent at times. And Michael Orr, the thing about Michael Orr is he really started to hit his stride towards when his Raven tenure was almost up, and once he started doing that, he got the contract from, was it the Panthers or the Titans? It was one of the 2.
Panthers. It was the Panthers.
Yeah, I know he played for both, but yeah, and then he really just fell off and didn't do much after he left Baltimore, but he really started his stride towards the end of his Ravens career.
And I also want to point out, even though neither of them were impact players for the Ravens, Jason Phillips and Cedric Pierman, both drafted in this draft class, They both had longevity in the league. Neither of them were stars. They were both role players. But when you only have 6 picks and 5 of them are long-term NFL players, that is a rarity that only is achieved by a great GM like Ozzie Newsome.
Yeah, it seems like a theme with a lot of these drafts within this first half of our list. It's guys who have had good careers but just weren't in Baltimore. Like Darren Waller's a classic example of that. Now let's get on to the number 4 ranking on our list, which is the 2016 draft. And this is a really interesting draft. We drafted Ronnie Stanley, who last year had the best season for a left tackle, arguably since Jonathan Ogden. He allowed the fewest amount of pressures for an offensive tackle since Jonathan Ogden. And then you scroll down the list a bit more. You have Kamalei Correa, Bronson Kaufusi. Both ended up being busts, but Kamalei Correa is still in the league on the Titans. Just didn't really do much in Baltimore. And then you have that 4th round, which I think was excellent, that 4th and 5th round both. You had Tavon Young, who's a top 3 slot corner in the league. Just health has been his biggest issue so far in his career. Chris Moore, not that good as a wide receiver, but one of the best special teamers in the league. You have Alex Lewis, Willie Henry, and Kenneth Dixon, who all kind of had potential, just injuries just kind of slowed their tenure here in Baltimore. And then you have Matthew Judon, obviously, in the 5th round, which is a home run to get a player like him in the 5th.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We're going from a number 5 slot, the 2009 draft, not a lot of quantity, but a lot of quality, to the 2016 draft, which had 11 draft picks. Obviously, the big hit, Ronnie Stanley. This was the year that Laramie Tunsil came out. He was regarded as the top tackle in the draft. Then that video surfaced on draft night of him smoking out that mask, and there was a lot of skepticism about where he's going to be picked. The Ravens passed on him. I would argue Stanley is a better tackle than Tunsil. They made the right call. That had a lot of interesting aspects to it that night. But you go down the list, 11 picks. We had 5 fourth-round picks. Tavon Young, to me, was the only one who really hit. And I think, like we talked about with Tyus Bowser, this is a big upcoming year for Tavon Young. Can he stay healthy? Can he return to the similar form he was able to play at before the injuries? But you can't really ridicule a draft with Ronnie Stanley and Matthew Judon. To get players of that caliber, 2 of them in the same class, that is an absolute home run of a draft. Stanley and Judon, you're hoping they're both leaders on their respective side of the ball for years to come as Ravens. We have solid role players. Chris Moore, I think he's a good role player. Dixon never really amounted to much, but when he played for us and he was on the field, he was kind of a bulldozing downfield back. I like those as complementary backs. Alex Lewis, Willie Henry misses in the 4th round, and Correa and Kaufusi in the 2nd and 3rd respectively really never amounted to much. So it's a bummer to see us not really hit on some of those day 2 picks, but again, like I said, Stanley and Judon, and then you throw in that wild card of Tavon Young coming up this upcoming season. This draft has potential to go down as one of the best the Ravens have had in recent memory.
Yeah, that day 3 for the Ravens was really, really good. That's how you draft on day 3. Ozzie showed a lot of people up with how he drafted on day 3 in that draft.
All right, we're finally cracking our top 3, and it's 2011. So in the 1st round, we had Jimmy Smith, still with the Ravens. We're talking about a cornerback who, when he was at the height of his game, was one of the best in the league, a lockdown corner. Obviously had the game-winning play in the Super Bowl, that lockdown back in the end zone with Michael Crabtree, which was not pass interference. And then one of my all-time favorite Ravens in the 2nd round, Torrey Smith, great wide receiver, Joe Flacco's go-to deep threat. And if you look down this list, rounds 1 through 7, there are no misses. It's just consistency across the board. We had Ja Reed at tackle in the 3rd. He was a solid utility guy for us. Tandon Doss, he was what Chris Moore is now before Chris Moore came to the team. Shockey Brown was a solid corner. He gambled a little bit too much for me, but he got the job done. Pernell McPhee back for his 2nd stint with the Ravens. And then Tyrod Taylor in the 6th round. He's competing for a starting job this summer out in Los Angeles. You look down this list, all these guys made it in the NFL. That's a solid draft.
Yeah, the thing about this class is you had Jimmy Smith at the top of the list. That was a good pick. He's obviously struggled with injuries throughout his career, but he has had longevity as a Raven. And to be from that 2011 draft class and still be here, I think that's pretty good 9-10 years later. You had Torrey Smith, who was a really good receiver for us, really pivotal in that Super Bowl run with that trio of Bolden, Smith, Jacoby. Ended up getting the big contract with San Francisco. It wasn't really the same after he left Baltimore, but he made an impact while he was here. Ja Reed started a few games for us on the offensive line. Tannen Doss, he was a decent receiver, but I'll never forgive him for that muff punt versus the Browns. Chalky Brown, I'll never forgive him for getting literally murdered by AJ Green and costing us the game. Pernell McPhee has had a really solid career. He's like all the other Ravens pass rushers who have broken out in their bag year, ended up getting the big contract from Chicago, kind of faltered out after that, but he's back in Baltimore, and I'm happy to have him back. He played with Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. He knows the Ravens way. He knows the culture, and now he's teaching it to this more younger generation of Ravens. So he's still playing a big role in this team, despite this being his second stint here. And then Tyrod Taylor, like you said, is competing for a starting job in Los Angeles. He started for Buffalo. He started for Cleveland. So while Tyrod Taylor is nothing more than a backup here, he has had a decent career elsewhere.
All right, we are down to our final 2 years, and we're looking at 2008 and 2018. That is the Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson drafts, respectively. And it is hard to place these two. Logan, what do you got in the 2 slot?
I have the 2008 draft in the 2 slot. And the reason was this class, you had Joe Flacco, you had Ray Rice. The rest of the draft was kind of lackluster. But when those are your first 2 picks, those are home runs out of the park. So there's no way this draft couldn't have been in the 2 slot. I just thought the 2018 draft had more depth, had more quality. But you got Joe Flacco, brought a Super Bowl to Baltimore, had the greatest postseason run for a quarterback in NFL history, 11 touchdowns, no interceptions, went into Mile High against Peyton Manning, won one of the greatest games I've ever seen, went into Foxborough against Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, dominated the Patriots, and then obviously the Super Bowl win against the 49ers, which he was MVP. You also had Ray Rice, who is still one of the best Ravens running backs ever. Obviously had the unfortunate incident that we're not going to talk about on the podcast, but he had a very good career as a Raven while he was here. And you scroll down this list, not really much of an impact, but there